Hi, today we're going to talk about the plasma membrane. We're going to go over the components of the plasma membrane. We're going to take a look at the function of the plasma membrane, and we're also going to look at what types of molecules can easily move through the plasma membrane and what types of molecules cannot. So let's get started. Now keep in mind that the plasma membrane surrounds all cells. So the plasma or the cell membrane is something that surrounds all cells. So whether or not we're talking about prokaryotic cells or our eukaryotic cells, plant animals, all cells have a membrane. This membrane is composed of a bilayer of phospholipids. So here in the diagram, we have in yellow are our phospholipids. So we've got one layer that's facing outside of the cell, and then we have another layer that's facing the inside of the cell. Within this phospholipid bilayer, we see that we have channel proteins. We have also embedded proteins with carbohydrate chains. So these things make up the main components of the plasma membrane. Now the plasma membrane, this model is referred to as, so this model here, right there, is referred to as the fluid mosaic model. It's fluid because the structures within the membrane are not fixed. So these phospholipids can actually flip from outside of the cell to inside of the cell. These channel proteins can actually move within this sea of phospholipids. And same with these other types of proteins, these glycoproteins with their carbohydrate chains. So it is fluid. It's referred to as a mosaic because it's made up of those different parts, the phospholipids, the carbohydrate chains, and the proteins. And obviously this is a model of what it looks like. We're going to take a closer look at the function of the plasma membrane. So the main function of the plasma membrane is to provide a flexible protective barrier for the cell. So it separates what's inside the cell from what is outside the cell. It also allows the cell to maintain homeostasis, so it controls what enters and leaves the cell. This is referred to as semi-permeability, and we're going to be taking a closer look at that in the next two slides. And it also allows for cell recognition. What this means is that your cells in your body have these markers on it. That's what the carbohydrate chains are on the surface of the cell. And your cells have these surface markers that allow your immune system to recognize the cells in your body as being part of you and not something that is foreign, maybe like a bacteria or a virus particle. So your body is able to detect any sort of foreign cells or foreign invaders because of these cell surface markers on the surface of the plasma membrane. We're now going to take a look at semi-permeability. So the plasma membrane is what we refer to as semi-permeable. That means that some things are able to freely enter the cell, and then some things are not able to enter the cell at all. The things that are able to freely pass through this lipid bilayer are small molecules and anything that is hydrophobic. So examples of these things are oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water. Now, our lipid bilayer is made up of phospholipids. So let's take a closer look at the phospholipids. So the polar head or the phosphate group is hydrophilic, which means that it is water-loving. And these tails are fatty acid tails, and those are hydrophobic. So we can see right here that our plasma membrane is made up primarily of hydrophobic molecules, which is why hydrophobic things can easily pass through the membrane. Anything that is hydrophilic is going to bounce right off because it's not going to be able to get through. So things that can't get through the plasma membrane are things like ions, hydrophilic molecules, and anything that's too large. So if anything's too big, it'll bounce right off of the plasma membrane, or if it is hydrophilic, it's not going to be able to get through these lipids, these fatty acid chains that make up the core of the lipid bilayer. So pause the video here and please answer these independent practice questions in your notes. Now that you've answered the independent practice questions, Let's review the answers. So for question number 1, it asks, which substance do you think will diffuse across the membrane most quickly? So here we're taking a look at different molecules and we're comparing their size. So water is going to be our molecule that is going to diffuse across the membrane most quickly because it is our smallest. It's our smallest molecule. The substance that's going to diffuse across the membrane most slowly is going to be our glucose right here. And that's because it is our largest. It's our largest molecule. Number 2 asks you to formulate a hypothesis about the relationship between molecule size and the rate of diffusion. So remember that a hypothesis is in the form of an if-then statement. So your hypothesis might be, if the molecule is large, then the rate of diffusion will be slow, or if the molecule is small, then the rate of diffusion will be fast. An experiment that you might design in order to test your hypothesis, you might use something that represents the cell. So you might have like a beaker of water. Okay, you might have something that represents a cell, so you stick something in that might represent a cell. You might put something like starch, which is a large molecule, large carbohydrate in here, and then you'll wait to see if that starch molecule is going to diffuse out of your makeshift cell here. It most likely will not, because starch, as we know, is a very large carbohydrate. So just to review, for a quiz or a test, you will need to know the structure of the membrane. So those main components of the cell membrane, those phospholipids, those proteins, and those carbohydrate chains. You need to know the 3 functions of the plasma membrane, and that it is a flexible barrier, separates what's inside the cell from what's outside the cell, that it regulates or controls what enters and leaves the cell because it is semi-permeable, and that it allows for cell recognition. So it's how your immune system actually identifies what cells are part of you and what cells might be foreign to you. And also you need to be able to identify what types of things can easily pass through the membrane and what types of things cannot. Remember that small molecules and our hydrophobic molecules can easily pass through the membrane, whereas anything that is hydrophilic or anything that is too large, and even some ions, are not going to be able to diffuse through the membrane. So good luck, and I hope this was helpful.